The next I call the miracle of the angel doctor. Dr. Curley couldn't diagnose it, but he knew Mom needed to be at National Jewish, and they traveled home from Denver. They didn't have the strength to discuss with anyone. They just wanted to wake up from this nightmare. And somehow, Dr. Curley was able to reach Mom and Dad, and somehow he was able to convince them to come in to see him at his office on their way home. Off the plane, they met at his office at 5 p.m. on a Friday. He spoke to the doc at National Jewish and was told similar things, but in doctor language, of course, and that included a 1 to 2 year wait list, best case. Dr. Curley told Mom and Dad he had a plan. He had done his fellowship in San Antonio at the University Medical Transplant Program, at the University Medical Center Transplant Program. He knew the program and he knew a lot of people there. He was also confident that their wait list was only 6 months or under. So he contacted a good friend, a longtime nurse with the program, and within 2 weeks, Mom and Dad were sitting in front of Dr. Luis Angel. There are many reasons we call him the angel doctor, one of which is his name. He is of Colombian descent, and if you pronounce his name like a typical American English speaker, it would sound something like this: Dr. Angel. My dad describes him as looking like a Latin movie star. He's brilliant, modest, exudes confidence, and always has a plan. Turns out he was instrumental in pioneering a way to evaluate and procure lungs in an average of 44 days at that time. Just what my mom needed. After meeting and listening intently to my mom's story, he stood up to leave and he said, "I'm sure I'll be seeing you again." And as he was leaving, my mom asked about the decision-making board they would need to meet to be considered for this program. Dr. Angel turned to both my mom and my dad, looked at them, and he said, "You're speaking to the board, and you call me when you're ready to be listed." That leads me to what I call the medical miracle. My parents got a call just before midnight, September 19, 2006, and bags were already packed. Mom was down to about 8% breathing capacity. They raced to San Antonio. They discovered pneumonia on the right donor lung. Mom had the choice to wait it out and hope for another bilateral donor or move forward with the left lung. It was a no-brainer. Take the lung. It was a perfect transplant, one of the smoothest, they said. Size was perfect. Everyone was thrilled. 9 days later, her body began to reject the new lung. She was intubated and essentially in an induced coma to allow her body to rest and hopefully accept the new organ. This plan began to fail. Several weeks had passed. The lung simply stopped working. All of the other organs were great, no lung. The respirator, her native, barely functioning, diseased right lung that they left in, were barely keeping her alive. Had she had the bilateral, she might not have been able to stay alive. Dr. Angel had what we call the tough talk, that it was now time to make some tough decisions. The lung didn't work, chances for survival were extremely slim, and it may be time to pull the plug. We thought, we prayed, we cried. The next day, Dad met with Dr. Angel and asked about any options at all. He offered one plan: to give her a tracheostomy, that's a hole in the windpipe, to take her out of the sedation and see how she does, and attempt to get her healthy enough to retransplant. But she was extremely weak. This plan was quite risky, and he would have to get the surgical team on board, and at that time it was about 50-50 on whether or not to let a plan like this move forward with the surgeons. Dad told him he'd do whatever it takes, sign whatever waivers that were required, anything. And Dr. Angel said, "Hey, that's all I need to hear." So he would present it, and sure enough, the plan moved forward. The short version is that the retransplant did not occur. Miraculously, the new lung began working. My mom made that lung her own for the next 11 years. And Dr. Angel said that they don't talk miracles like that here. They don't talk miracles at all. But this is a true miracle. He said people just simply don't survive severe acute rejection like this. And in years to come, he would often refer to her as his miracle patient. Many consider Mom's 11-year survival on the one lung, on that left lung, a miracle in itself, given the odds. There were some other, these were just some of the big events, but there's so many more things that happen. And many doors open at just the right time. And like Dr. Angel couldn't explain Mom's survival, we had a difficult time understanding and explaining the sequence of events over the years. The doors just kept opening. They just kept opening and opening. There was a time 1 year post-transplant, my mom contracted a deadly fungus in her left lung, her new lung, while visiting us on the East Coast. And the problem surfaced as they left us and they hit New Jersey to see my godmother. And she was isolated in a room at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City for 10 days. She was given a controversial and toxic medication, which she ended up staying on for several years. The chances of her leaving New York City were slim. The chances of her survival was slim. And yet, she walked out of that ICU 4 weeks later and flew back to Texas. There was a time 6 years post-transplant when needing closer treatment options was necessary. My parents even toyed with the idea of moving closer and giving up their beautiful home here in Temple to move closer to Austin and San Antonio so they could be closer to medical care. She went in for a bronchoscopy locally, and they didn't have enough staff on hand that day to accommodate her right away. But wait, there's a new doctor who can see her. She walked in, she looked at him, and she asked, "How do I know you?" Dr. Juan Sanchez reminded my mom that he worked on her during her time of the San Antonio transplant. Turns out he was in San Antonio completing his fellowship, and Mom was one of his first patients. And he would later become her trusted advisor for the rest of her life. I sometimes refer to him as the one and only, and he would just modestly smile and shake his head. And that was at the time, 2012-ish, and he was there to start a transplant program in Temple, Texas, of all places. Not San Antonio, not Houston, not Dallas, Temple. What are the chances? 4 years ago, my mom was admitted with multiple flus, H1N1 and flu B, I believe. Dr. Sanchez wasn't sure she was going to survive. He really didn't think she was going to survive. In fact, this last time around, he referenced that time. People were dying from H1N1 all over the place. And in fact, a little girl passed away at the Children's Hospital the day before I arrived to Texas. And Mom had two types of flu, one lung, a compromised immune system, and 8 days later, she walked out of the ICU. Since that toxic fungal medicine that causes cancer that she was given in New York City, Mom developed precancerous growths that were removed regularly, hundreds of them, hundreds. Every 3 weeks, she'd have them removed. 2 years ago, squamous cells, cancer growths had spread to a really tricky position on both sides of her eyes, both eyes. The doctors were 95% sure it was cancer by the appearance. They weren't sure how to tackle it and remove successfully. The doctors were worried she was going to lose her sight, and miraculously, the biopsies came back negative. Her sight was saved. What are the chances? My younger brother was in a car accident in Waco, Texas a couple of years ago. He's a big guy like me. He's much taller, so that's why I don't refer to him as my little brother anymore. He's my younger brother. The gentleman who caused the accident did so by cutting across multiple lanes of traffic to make a turn. My brother, his big presence, got out of the car, and he was going over to see if he could help them. They probably thought Todd was coming after him because of the maneuver he made. Turns out the man was in a panic. He was a transplant recipient going into rejection. He had been all over Waco looking for a special anti-rejection medicine, that was needed for survival. Prograf, for those of you in the transplant community here. All the pharmacies around were out. Guess who had extra on hand? You guessed it. Let me say that she would probably be okay with me saying this now. Within an hour, my mom met this man and his wife in a Starbucks in Waco, Texas, with 300 extra pills that she had on hand. What are the chances? We believe there was a reason for that accident. It didn't happen by chance. And these stories go on and on and on. If she had one wish, it would be that everyone in this world would be an organ donor. It's so simple. It's a selfless act. And because of a courageous 22-year-old named Amy, her decision to be an organ donor, my mom was given a new lease on life. Sure, her lifestyle changed considerably, but despite her hard work, some limitations, all the medical challenges and the bumps in the road, as my dad would call them, Amy gave her one of the sweetest gifts one could ever give another. That left lung allowed my mom to meet and know her grandchildren. And more importantly, we would say, it allowed time for the grandchildren to know her and her kindness and her generosity and her enthusiasm and her loving ways. She was given a unique gift that most of us can't even imagine to understand. I cherished every conversation, every relationship. She genuinely cherished every breath. So to her close friends, including the sisterhood, her tight-knit transplant community of medical friends, to the wonderful doctors and nurses, medical technicians, to her siblings, Uncle Dick, Uncle Bob, Auntie Margie and Auntie Kathy, to her precious grandchildren, Taylor, Trey, Andrew, Cole, Chloe, and to her in-laws, Baba, Susan, Janice, Marianne, Michelle, and my wife, Brianne, and to my brother, Todd. You all mattered. You all were her world. And to my father, AKA Mark Sr., Pops, Mr. Hero, Grandpa, and yes, Big Daddy. You were her everything, and everything is going to be okay.
It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. You give life.